Hello and welcome. This is Chris Hodgkins of Jazz Then and Now on Jazz London Radio, and this is part 2 of my interview with Clark Tracey, who's written a biography of his father. The book is The Godfather of British Jazz, The Life and Music of Stan Tracey, and it's published by Equinox. And I commence the proceedings with a track from the Stan Tracey Orchestra at the Appleby Jazz Festival, and this was recorded in July 2004. It's a tune that Stan wrote for... the track is The Sixth Day, and that's from Stan Tracey's The Genesis Suite. In the band are Henry Lowther, Steve Waterman, Noel Langley and Mark Armstrong on trumpets, Mark Nightingale, Adrian Fry, Roger Williams, trombone, Pete King, Nigel Hitchcock, alto sax, Evan Parker, Andy Panay on tenor sax, Alan Barnes on baritone sax, Andrew Kleindirt on double bass, Clark Tracey on drums, and of course Stan Tracey on piano.
there's a marvellous moment in the book when Stan's looking for a new drummer, and Jackie said, "Well, what's wrong with Clark?" Was that something you were angling for? Or
well, it seems at that point my mum had changed her mind about
right.
me being in the business.
Because Jackie wasn't keen that you should go into the business, or
yeah, I think underneath it all, she was very, proud of me doing what I did. But initially, just the fact that I wanted to be involved in music, it was almost discouragement. I wouldn't say it's discouraging, but it was just a pained expression, like, "Are you sure you want to do this?" Family, with very little to play with financially, It was. Stan was just lucky at the time. He bought a house with Jackie when they both had fantastic jobs, and then it all finished. That was that, all gone. But they still had their property, so he could live okay in that respect.
And there was a property in Streatham, was it?
Yeah.
So was it a sort of revelation to him?
What they both knew about my drumming, apart from the fact that I didn't practice enough, I'd left school at 16. As soon as I could. Parents had heard me playing with all kinds of different bands, but not especially jazz or modern jazz. But at home I was practicing with all Stan's recordings, including the octet, in the headphones, and just playing along to them. So I knew his music inside out. One night I remember sitting there with them, and Brian Spring rang up quite late in the evening. The outcome of the phone call was that he said he wanted to leave the band. Stan just said, "Yeah, okay, that's fine, I understand." Just like didn't even go into it at all. Just said, "Yeah, okay, if that's what you want to do," and left it at that. And the next morning, I think it was, Mum and Dad both sort of asked me, "Do you fancy doing the drum chair?" And I thought, not really. I'm not prepared for this at all. Nowhere near it. But they knew that I knew all his music. I didn't. They said that one of the things was they didn't have to go through the bother of rehearsing with somebody new and running people in and all that. Stan obviously did with his son on drums. The way I would have jumped at the opportunity myself, So yeah, I went to Barry Summer School for a 2-week crash course, and it was announced in Melody Maker. By the time I was out, it was all in print and photo, thanks to Mum, our PR, and that was it really. It's both feet in the deep end.
You're thrown in at the deep end.
Yeah, the first gig was the 100 Club. Which was absolutely solid. It was over 300 people back in those days, Both bars open and the Chinese restaurant. It's fantastic. Brian Spring was in the audience. A little bit of a nightmare. And I feel like now that I've actually met everybody who was at that gig.
Right.
There's so many people over the years who've told me they were at my first gig. It wasn't my proudest moment, of course, and I've got it on a tape to remind me forever. And the next gig was a couple of days later, and we're in Switzerland playing to like a few thousand people, and that was equally mind-boggling. I was very comfortable with the music we were playing, funnily enough, but it was just all these people, and knowing how not very talented I was. That was the problem.
The great thing is you knew where you were in the scheme of things.
Yeah, I fitted into one part of the glove, I suppose, nicely,
You knew where you were in the scheme of things. You knew how good you were. You knew what you needed to do, and you weren't operating into like some people operate under a delusion of adequacy.
Right. Yeah. It wasn't that way around.
You weren't like stint to.
Yeah, I had to. Yeah.
A short learning curve as well, and you had to do it.
But nobody else booked me for about 3 years. That was it. I was just Stan's drummer.
Yeah.
And I don't blame them. It's listening back to anything that I played back then. It was I had a specific style, which was like a poor version of Brian Spring,
right.
Which I should never have attempted. For a long time I thought I had to play like Brian, And I think you do when you idolise somebody's drumming or their musicianship. You do try and play like them, and you either succeed or you don't. But I mean, trying to get close to Brian is for anybody a nightmare at any level.
But before we move on, what's the next piece of music you'd like to play?
Well, at that point, when I joined in 1978, that was the two major things he was doing was the octet and the quartet, and he wasn't really doing anything recording wise for obvious reasons, I think. But he came out with some amazing stuff with a duo with John Sermon, Sonatinas, and one of my favourite albums, TNT, with Keith Tippett.
Yeah.
That was just incredible. So perhaps something from TNT that got picked up for Blue Note International in later years. And it doesn't matter which, it's totally free improvised music.
Yeah.
And they later, when there was a gap, they said, "Oh, that sounds like the end of a tune, so we'll call it that." The titles just came, sporadically, like the music.
So let's hear Stan Tracey and Keith Tippett recorded live in the Wigmore Hall in December 1974, and the tune is Biformis.
then coming back to Stan's biography, both your careers have been inextricably entwined. And you joined the band. You spent 3 years without anyone giving you a gig outside the band. But you knew what you had to do. You had to find your own voice. But then I think the other thing is with all the various bands you've had. First one I remember is with Guy Barker. But you've had a succession of fantastic bands since. One band with Mark Armstrong in, where you've always encouraged young players.
I think I just got older.
Yeah.
Seriously, I think that's all that's happened. That band with Guy and Jamie, I was the youngest one in it.
Right.
And following on from that, as I'm getting older and hearing young musicians, I mean, part of me did think, and I still do think this way. It's good to get your ass kicked by people younger than yourself. You can get into a very complacent trap musically, and I know Stan acted the same way. I don't know if he was particularly thinking the same way, but he didn't particularly think about age. But there he is working with Gerard Presenza, who was sort of, Gerard was about 18 and Stan had just hit 70, so quite a big age difference there. And he used to ask me a lot as well, who are the younger players worth knocking around with, and he'd put them in occasionally at a monthly gig at the Bull's Head he had, just to try them out really. They had no idea they might be in one of his bands pretty soon, or eventually on his big band or something, or a brand new band. Sometimes that happened. He just heard a whole bunch of guys and a commission comes in one day. That's it. I'm going to use all of those guys.
Yeah,
and that was good.
The interesting thing about Stan is all his writing has been for all sorts of different ensembles. Is that something he did? Was it by happen chance?
I think I know what you're trying to say. First off, he hated writing.
Right. Really
hated it, having to write anything. So that romantic idea of going to the piano and outpours this wonderful stuff. That's what happened in the 50s and the early 60s. And it seems from then on, it took a commission and a deadline for him to write anything. And he really did hate the whole process of, the pages of things torn up and thrown away that he'd come up with, And as I said, it's a commission was always the thing that spurred him on, and the commission usually came from my mum pushing somebody, as you know, or much better, somebody approaching Stan out of the blue, and would you do this? Then he had to think, oh God, here we go again, And as I was saying, also with the octet, when the way that came into existence, the size of the band was down to the size of the commission. And I did notice they got £30 each to go to Wales and do that octet gig. That was the fee back then, 1972. But that was the formation of the octet.
Yeah.
And if you just look at what the octet's done since then, we've had some good gigs since then.
Yeah. Because there was, the octet. There was the wonderful album that you reissued on Re-Steamed to the octet at Bracknell.
Yeah, Bracknell Connection. And that goes like muck off a hot shovel, doesn't it? That band at the time, I know, it's that dream team for me of, the core of the octet was Art Theme and Dave Green and Brian Spring. Yeah. It was... I couldn't wait to go and sit in the front row and just lap it up, none of us could. It was a very special relationship they had, and funny, going through the book, it struck me at how, they had a lot of gigs, but it wasn't over a long period. Mm. It seemed to me this band had been around for ages, that union, but sort of late 60s, as late as 68, 69. I think it's the first time they started working together, but not as a quartet or a unit, especially. It's just being thrown together for a recording or whatever. And then Art became a member of the quartet, replacing Bobby when he went down to the south coast to recover. Peter King was also a member at that time. And then, yeah, it was all over by when I joined, it was 1978. So it wasn't that long, the whole thing. It's less than 10 years.
Let's conclude part 2 with a track from the Stan Tracey duo trio album, Soundcheck. In the band was obviously Stan Tracey on piano, Andrew Kleindirt on bass and Clark Tracey on drums. And the tune is Little Old Pottsville.